Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Johnson of Star Crow Astrology, and I am making this video to discuss some of what I'm watching with Uranus in the last decan of Taurus. So it's late January of 2024, and Uranus has entered the last decan or the last third, last 10 degrees of Taurus. So Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, and Taurus does not love having Uranus as a visitor because Taurus is about safety and security. It's our systems of finance. It wants things calm and predictable, right? Safe and secure, calm and predictable. And that just doesn't happen when Uranus is in Taurus. Uranus is the planet of shocks and disruption, and Uranus is the lightning bolt. It's the bomb. It shakes things up. Ultimately, Uranus breaks things apart in order to awaken us to higher consciousness, but it doesn't necessarily always feel like that. So with Uranus in Taurus, we have seen disruptions for the last several years, as all of you know, in the global economy. We've seen disruptions in supply chains. The markets have been unpredictable. We've seen inflation. This is all Uranus and Taurus kind of phenomena. So as I was saying in my last video, with Uranus in late Taurus, what we have seen with previous Uranus in Taurus cycles is the breakdown of an old economic order. And then as Uranus moves into Gemini, we have the emergence of the next economic order. So specifically, during the 1700s, Uranus was in Taurus prior to the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And the Uranus in Taurus period is when tensions really, really mount, right, between this rebel colony in the United States and the parent country, England. This is when the tensions really, really mount with Uranus in Taurus. The United States signed the Declaration of Independence with Uranus in Gemini. Most of the Revolutionary War was fought with Uranus in Gemini. But some of the early battles were fought with Uranus in Taurus. And then if we take a look at the French Revolution, King Louis was rapidly bankrupting the country with Uranus in Taurus, funding wars in the Americas among other hobbies like luxurious, lavish living. As Uranus got into Gemini, the country faced rapid inflation. So, which is like, going to bed one day and waking up the next morning and bread costing $15. That's kind of what it was like. And people couldn't afford to eat. So naturally, they decided they didn't need no stinking king, and they overthrew the monarchy and set up their own form of representative democracy. If we move forward to the 1600s, oh, by the way, Uranus is an 82-year cycle. It takes about 82 years for Uranus to move around the entire zodiac. Uranus spends approximately 7 years in any given sign. So if we move forward to where are we now? We're in the 1800s now. If we move forward to the 1800s, Uranus was in Taurus prior to the start of the Civil War. So this is the period where the old economic order breaks down. The South thinks that it can't survive. It's the agricultural center of the country. The South thinks that it can't survive without slavery, but tensions grow. And as Uranus moves and some of the first battles of the Civil War were fought with Uranus in Taurus. But as Uranus moved into Gemini, the Civil War really gets started, and most of Reconstruction happens with Uranus in Cancer, interestingly. Cancer, of course, is the homeland, the family. Reconstruction mostly happens with Uranus in Taurus. But Uranus was still in was still in Gemini. It was in late Gemini when the Civil War ended. And if we move forward, Uranus was in Taurus at the beginning of World War II. And when Uranus got into Gemini, we saw the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. And that was the emergence of the new global economic order. So the war was not over yet, but they were dividing up the spoils of war in 1944. And the Bretton Woods Agreement, of course, was the agreement which brought the US dollar forward as the global reserve currency. It took a while to get all of the countries to sign on to trading in US dollars, but they did. And the agreement was that countries could take their US dollars and trade them in at an exchange rate of $35 per ounce of gold. So it was not a gold standard. FDR took us off of the gold standard during the Great Depression. But the global exchange rate and the fixed exchange rate at $35 an ounce per $35 per ounce of gold kept the dollar pretty stable and the world economy pretty stable up until 1971, of course, when Nixon untethered the dollar from gold. But more on the Bretton Woods Agreement. So it's the whole financial order, right, that came out of World War II with the dollar emerging, as I was saying, as the global reserve currency. We saw the World Bank was emerged out of the Bretton Woods Agreement, and the IMF and the UN. And I think that's all I want to say about it. But it's the whole new economic paradigm, right? It's established with Uranus and Gemini. So then here's the interesting thing that I want to talk about. And we're now in this part with Uranus in Taurus. We're now in this part of our Uranus in transit Taurus, our Uranus in Taurus transit that we're going through right now, where some of this stuff is going to be coming up again. So here's what I'm watching, right? When we have to go back into the history for me to set up some of what I'm watching. But the Bretton Woods Agreement coming out of World War II lasted until 1971. So the Bretton Woods Agreement starts to fall apart when the U.S. basically we got into financial trouble because we overindulged in one of our favorite hobbies, which is war. And we got into real financial trouble after spending so much money on our war in Vietnam, and really hurt the dollar. We were printing a lot of money, and the dollar started to inflate in the 1970s. The economy was, what did they call the economic conditions in the 70s? Stagflation. So the economy was stagnant, employment rates were stagnant, and the dollar was rapidly inflating. So major inflation through this period. And some countries, of course, that were trading in dollars started to really doubt the power of the dollar. France famously, in August of 1971, sent a ship into the New York harbor to get all of their gold from the U.S., from the Federal Reserve. But did we give them their gold? No, we did not. We sent that boat back to France. And Nixon famously untethered the dollar. That's the language in the New York Times article, which you can look up yourself. I believe the day that this article was published was August 16th, 1971. The headline was "Nixon Untethers the Dollar from Gold." So at this point, Nixon says, okay, we're not doing the exchange rate anymore of $35 per ounce of gold for your dollars that you're trading in. And at this point, we have a free floating dollar, right? A totally free floating dollar. It's not tethered to anything. So Nixon and Kissinger come up with this brilliant plan. There's also an oil crisis during this period of time where the OPEC oil producing countries stopped producing oil, and it's like an oil embargo. So the price of oil shoots through the roof. When I think of this period of time, I think of just long, long, long car lines, right? In the pictures in the news. Not that I was alive, I wasn't alive, just from my research. That's the time really characterized by oil shortages. So Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon go to the Saudi king, who was it, Faisal, and they come up with this agreement that oil can only be purchased in US dollars in exchange for, assistance with technology to run their oil production, US technology, and the use of our military, right? The Saudis got, we've done a lot in the Mideast with our military, and that's part of this agreement, this supportive agreement between Nixon and Kissinger and the Saudis, where the US dollar got pegged to oil. So this is when the dollar emerges as the petrodollar. And I find that the younger the person is I'm talking to about the petrodollar, the more likely they are to know about this piece of our economic history. I don't find that boomers generally are aware of the fact that our dollar has been pegged to oil since 1973. Some people, I'm a Gen Xer. Some people my age will know. Way more millennials know. I find that millennials are really aware of the petrodollar, which is interesting. It's just interesting. Much more aware of the way that the dollar is pegged to oil. So through this agreement, and the agreement, I believe, going through the New York Times archives, I've really tried to find a date because, of course, I want to pull the chart for when this agreement happened. And what it looks like to me is that it was a series of conferences and agreements that took place between 1973 and 1975. I think that the agreement was signed in the summer of 1974, but I'm not completely and totally sure. And then by 1975, the rest of the OPEC countries were signing on to this agreement and starting to sell oil only in US dollars. So what this meant was that, well, oil, it's kind of genius to peg the free floating dollar to oil because oil is the foundational commodity in global industrial civilization. You have to have oil to produce the goods, to ship the goods, to put the goods on the shelves of the store and run the lights. And it's kind of genius. It's the foundational commodity. But making it so that oil could only be purchased in US dollars created a huge need for US dollars, right? Because if country X wants to buy oil, they have to trade in their national currency for US dollars, and it creates this artificial need for dollars. It props up the dollar, essentially. So what we have happening in 2024, and really this has been going on for a while, but I'm not sure how many years, is that we have countries now forming agreements that they are going to purchase oil with their own national currencies. And so this is the BRICS countries. BRICS is BRICS. You can research the BRICS, the BRICS countries yourself. But the BRICS countries so far are Saudi Arabia and India and China and Russia, Nigeria, Venezuela, Kazakhstan. That one always amuses me. Did I say Nigeria? Did I say South Africa? So more countries are signing on. We have oil producing countries signing on to BRICS, as well as some of the largest economies, global economies, signing on to BRICS. And it's advantageous for them to buy and sell oil in their own national currencies, right? So this is, and once this really kicks in and you have, say, India and China purchasing oil in yuan, and I don't know what the currency is in India, um, that will it'll inflate the dollar is what it'll do. We have this artificial need for dollars with the petrodollar system. And as that crumbles, well, there's going to be a lot of extra dollars, right? Where people are no longer using the US dollar. So add to that the United States is doing plenty of damage to its own dollar just by printing money to finance foreign wars. Smedley Butler famously said that war is a racket and all wars are bankers' wars. And we certainly see that with the way that we are just bankrupting ourselves and rapidly yeah, we're just printing money to finance these foreign wars. And it's an upward transfer of wealth, of course, to the military industrial complex. And this is typical in the late stages of empire. What you generally see is that the military industrial complex is where all of the power is, and it starts cannibalizing the rest of the state, right? So we're just sending all of this money up, and there's so much just money laundering going on. There's so much funny money going on, right? But that also is a hyperinflationary kind of cycle that hasn't completely hit home yet. So just the size of the deficit, right? We have Janet Yellen has said that the United States is insolvent. That's kind of a big deal to have the Treasury Secretary say that. And we have Jerome Powell saying much the same thing, the head of the Federal Reserve. And we've had both of them and Joe Biden suggesting that the United States might move toward some sort of central bank digital currency. And that's what I'm really watching. So we have these kind of chinks in the old established order, right? With the US dollar being the global reserve currency, with it being pegged to oil. We can see coming down the pike, and not too far down the pike, some really big shakeups with the old economic order, right? So I am watching through this period of Uranus moving through this last part of Taurus. And Uranus will move into Gemini for the first time next summer, in the summer of 2025. It's going to go in and retrograde back out. In 2026, Uranus will move into Gemini for reals for 7 years. And that'll be in the spring of 2026. So I'm keeping an eye on BRICS. I'm keeping an eye on the Fed and what the Fed is doing. And I'm anticipating that we will be shifting towards some sort of central bank digital currency. So this is not to be confused with cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is blockchain. It doesn't have to do with the central banks. Central bank digital currency is a currency issued by the central banks and digital. So, and it's being piloted, of course, in China with the digital yuan. You can look this up. And the challenge for the populace with having some kind of digital currency issued by our central governments is that this money is programmable. So it makes it very hard, for example, to voice your dissent, because if the money is programmable by the central banks, it can be turned off if you're too loud and too much of an agitator. And you can look to China to see kind of what I'm talking about with that, and also look toward the trucker protests, the Canadian trucker protests that happened back in January and February, I believe, of 2021. This amazing protest in Canada against, well, they were protesting basically for freedom of movement. And during COVID, right? Because and these were largely vaccinated truckers, but they had to have a pass on their phones. They're saying that they were vaccinated so that they could move freely within Canada. And the protest was really about freedom of movement. We don't want the one pass to rule them all on our phones, saying that we have the right to move around our country. We want freedom of movement. So the truckers shut down Ottawa, like famously, like, okay, we can shut things down. We're just going to park our trucks and stop traffic. Well, that became a real problem. It was very effective. It was very effective. And so what the Trudeau administration did was cut off these protesters' access to their bank accounts. And they cut off their access not only to their bank accounts, but to their cryptocurrency. They turned off their insurance to their trucks. So freedom of protest, maybe not so much, right? So having a digital currency and programmable currency could be pivoted toward greater control of the populace through access to money. And that's something really worth paying attention to. As I said in my previous video, I am expecting people to unite around our shared economic interest. If you are not a billionaire, we are all going to be in the same group, right? We're all going to be impacted by whatever changes are coming toward in the economic system. And economics has the capacity to unite the populace like nothing else, right? We all need to eat. We all need places to live. We have shared economic interests. And this, I think, although it sounds, I would rather say the economic forecast is booming. I would rather say that, but it's not true. It's going to get interesting. But economics have the capacity to unite the people like nothing else, like nothing else. So I am really hopeful about what this Uranus in the last stages of Taurus and Uranus moving into Gemini will bring. I do have hope. What else do I want to say? And of course, we've been seeing this incremental change, the slow incremental change toward a new economic system, slow incremental. But with Jupiter conjoining Uranus at 21 degrees of Taurus on April 20th of 2023, I think it might speed up a bit. Uranus is a fast energy, and Jupiter speeds up, it makes everything bigger. So I think we could have an inflection point with these changes in the economy as Jupiter conjoins with Uranus at 21 degrees of Taurus in April. Jupiter, of course, if we look back to the mythology of Jupiter, Jupiter is the king, right? Jupiter is the king. And let's think back to December of 2020, when we had the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Remember that? It was so beautiful. Just after sunset on solstice and the weeks prior to solstice and a little bit after solstice, you could see Jupiter and Saturn about 30 degrees above the horizon. Absolutely gorgeous. And Jupiter and Saturn, that conjunction is really, really, really playing into this Taurus stuff and this Jupiter conjoining Uranus at 21 degrees of Taurus, because Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter is the new king and Saturn is the old king in astrology. When they conjoin, you have the passing of one era, one dynasty. We don't have kings and queens really anymore, but to use the metaphor, one leadership, one reign, let's just say one reign to another. And so there's a saying with it, the king is dead, long live the king. The Saturn king is dead. long live the Jupiter. Jupiter is the new king. So we had that conjunction back on solstice of 2020. And that conjunction is referred to as the interregulum, right? And that it's the space in between in between two dynasties. And it's a magic space where we don't really know who the king is. So I've been watching and waiting and curious, and it happened at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Aquarius has to do with technology. So Jupiter moved off of Saturn, right? And it's coming around to conjoin Uranus in April. And then Jupiter is going to move over into Gemini, where it will square Saturn. First square, I believe, is in August. Second square is in December. The third and final square will be in June of 2025. So those two planets, the interregulum, the king is dead, God save the king, right? And we don't quite know who the new king is yet. Oh, these two planets are going to be in conversation again for the first time since 2020. And I think that we're about to find out who the new king is. I think we're about to find out who the new king is, or have a better idea, right? It's going to start coming clear. So those are some of what I'm thinking about with Uranus moving through the last part of Taurus. Uranus moves into, oh, I already said, Uranus is going to have its initial ingress into Gemini in 2025. It'll move in for its 7-year transit in the spring of 2026. All right, so you guys watch and wait with me. We're in for a wild ride, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful about what Uranus and Taurus will bring in terms of uniting the people, and I'm down for that. All right, you guys, thanks for hanging out. I'll see you next time.